Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the self-titled debut album from Weval. You know, it always feels like I'm behind the times when I talk about electronic music. And look, I am trying to keep up here, but it's only getting more and more tricky when it feels like for every electronic album that I cover, I end up missing 5. Which is kind of weird, because I don't tend to get a lot of requests for electronic music outside of the mainstream crossover stuff, but I'm still trying to dig into the genre to understand it and find more stuff that I actually like. And if strip mining Pitchfork's critically acclaimed section helps me get to the stuff that might pick up more traction eventually, I guess I'll take that. So let's talk about an album that dropped a couple weeks back and seemingly fell under everybody's radar. The self-titled debut album from electronic duo Weval. A pair of Dutch friends. They don't really identify under any specific electronic music subgenre, but from what I was able to dredge up, you could probably put them closer to the spacier, more wiry and experimental side of Deep House. Or at least that's what I picked up from them when I took a look at their 2013 Half-Age EP. It certainly wasn't the most experimental electronic music that I've ever heard, but there was a melodic consistency and chill, sandy vibe that I actually quite enjoyed. So while I doubted this album might replace Jamie XX's In Color as my go-to summer electronic album, I decided to give their self-titled debut a try, so what'd I find with it? Well, really folks, this is the sort of electronic album that I really like finding. It's not a masterpiece, but for the right environment, this album will play very well. In this case, I can see slotting in Weval's self-titled debut into any party with friends or into the more relaxed but weird side of Deep House, and they probably adore it. Although I do question outside of that laid-back vibe how much replay value this album really has. But Weval's a solid start. It's cohesive with a distinctive sound that does call back to enough to its influences without being defined by them, and ultimately with more standout moments than fumbles. It's a pretty damn good album, if not quite a great one. And that part's actually a little bit surprising when you consider the synth melodies that Weval utilizes. While I like the wiry, oscillating tones that can spiral towards chiptune or gurgle towards lower, bassy patterns, most of the chords that compose these melodies seem a tad off. Either the oddly tuned guitars on Square People or the synths on Just In Case. There are very few major fourths or fifths on this album, and frequently the tones that I feel like they're on the cusp of sliding off key as they switch up, mostly speaking to diminished or minor chord changes that perpetually give this album a feeling of relaxed unease. If In Color was intended for the afternoon stage at the festival leading into the evening, Weval's when it slips past dusk towards night at a quieter stage. And yet a lot of these actual textures on these songs help ease the melodies in surprisingly well. The bass beats range between oily and I Don't Need It to a sandy thickness that matches very well with the percussion, which is easily the highlight of this album with great crisp cymbal tones and solid mid-range grooves that fizz and crackle on the edges, but always feel rounded enough to not disrupt the vibe. Take the borderline tropical vibe on the battle as the mix fades in and out of negative space like an Arca track, or how the drums manage to support the careening spray of synth on Madness, or the wiry pluck playing off the thinner skitter on Your Mind. The absolute best grooves, they come on the final 2 songs. You Made It Part 2 and Years to Build. The former supported by a really solid textured groove that breaks into a progressive blast of drumming on the final minute that comes out of nowhere and is awesome. The latter, it plays off a rougher line that eventually matches the sandy presence and holds that vocal gut punch moment incredibly well. Great song. And yeah, I should mention the vocal snippets here, the majority of which are pulled from KW Toe Ring and are actually quite agreeable, even if they aren't entirely comprehensible. Now that seems more like a compositional choice, and it's clear that Weval are giving the ghostly presence of the voices enough to be audible, but never quite enough to distract as they ebb in and out, or in the case of My Lars Daughter on Days, just chopped into fragments. Now I'm on the fence about how well this works. Many of these vocals often feel like they could land with more satisfying impact if the synth was more on tune with them, especially on Ways to Go or Days, especially when that extremely ugly synth comes in for the outro of the latter song. It doesn't fit at all, really a sour moment there. You get much stronger results like in the slightly more layered fragments on Your Mind, or the vocoder on Years to Build. Granted, when you do get this many vocal fragments, you also start wondering about the lyrics, and really there's not a lot to go off if you want to find any meaning. The most striking lines seem to imply a sense of throwing off consequences and cutting loose, finding separate paths to take. But then there's Years to Build, which features one of the most cutting moments on the album, repeating the line, "It takes years to build up to something when you try," and then abruptly the line shifts. "It takes years to build up to something, then you die." The mix then stops suddenly, and the question of whether it all was worth it hangs as the mix slowly reassembles for the final outro. It's a pretty creepy moment, but I'd argue it sticks the landing pretty effectively. It's a great closer for this album. album. But really, it would be how I describe a lot of this album, because it really shouldn't work as well as it does for me. I don't normally have a lot of tolerance for melodic progressions this atonal and warped, but Weval manages to draw them together with smart composition and a cohesive commitment to groove that I can definitely respect. Again, I'm not quite sure how often I'd listen to this or in how many environments that it would play pretty well, but I can definitely respect it for having a distinctive sound and identity. So for me, I'm thinking a light 7 out of 10 and definitely a recommendation. If you're into the more experimental side of deep house, it's still pretty accessible. And you know what? More often than not, I'll take this. Check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I've been more than grateful. I got the poll up here, so if any one of you guys might have listened to this album, I'd be curious to see what you think of it. I can't imagine many of you have. It really has gotten 0 requests. I was just curious. But also, as you have all probably realized by now, the votes for coming in for my 3rd-year anniversary video, where I cover an album from last year in 2015, it's coming up to a close, and the next 2 days will be the last 2 days I'm going to be taking votes here. So, if you've already voted on previous videos, I've been tracking it. Keep that in mind. There's no additional votes going forward there. But if you guys are interested and you haven't cast votes for a potential album that I might cover next year, I'd be curious to hear what you want me to actually tally up. By the end of Friday on Saturday, that's when I'm going to be taking the overall count. So currently right now, it's a 3-horse race. I'd be curious to see which one comes out ahead. But until then, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming up that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.